Wyoming Territory, 1878. The unforgiving wind swept across the vast prairie, carrying with it the scent of sage and promise. For Colton Travis, that promise had long ago turned bitter. At 25 years old, he'd already lived several lifetimes of hardship, each one teaching the same cruel lesson. On the frontier, a man survived alone or not at all. The morning sun cast long shadows as Colton guided his dun gelding through the outskirts of Whispering Pines, a struggling settlement nestled against the foothills of the Wind River Range. His lean, muscular frame sat easy in the saddle, though his piercing blue eyes remained alert, scanning the horizon with the practiced wariness of a man who'd learned trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Not much longer, Scout," he murmured to his horse, patting the animal's neck. "Just long enough to restock supplies, then we'll be heading back to open country where we belong." The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. 6 years of drifting from ranch to ranch, taking whatever honest work he could find between cattle drives, had left him with little more than a reputation as a reliable hand who never stayed in one place. Colton had convinced himself that's how he preferred it. No attachments meant no disappointments, no betrayals. The memory of finding his father's homestead burned to the ground, his parents' graves freshly dug by neighbors after a raid, had taught him early that loving something meant eventually losing it. The main street of Whispering Pines appeared ahead, a single dusty thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings in various states of disrepair. Colton's gaze lingered on families going about their morning business, a father teaching his son to whittle on the general store porch, a mother adjusting her daughter's bonnet before church. Something twisted in his chest, a longing he refused to acknowledge. Temporary stop, he reminded himself, just passing through. He dismounted outside the general store, securing Scout to the hitching post before adjusting his worn Stetson. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee, leather, and dried goods greeted him. The proprietor, a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. "Morning, stranger. What can I help you with today?" Colton handed over his list: coffee, beans, bacon, ammunition. Simple needs for a solitary existence. While the shopkeeper gathered his items, the door opened, bringing with it a gust of wind and the unmistakable tension of discomfort. Conversation ceased. Colton turned, curiosity getting the better of him. A young woman stood in the doorway, holding a small basket. She was strikingly beautiful, with golden blonde hair partially contained beneath a simple bonnet and eyes the color of spring violets. Her blue calico dress, though modestly cut and slightly faded from washing, couldn't disguise her graceful figure. Colton guessed her to be no more than 22, yet there was something in her expression, a wariness, a resignation that spoke of trials beyond her years. "I'll come back later," she said softly, already retreating. "No need, Miss Amelia," the shopkeeper called, though his tone lacked warmth. "What do you need today?" "Just some thread and flour, Mr. Daniels. I can wait until—"
Messes.
Peterson was just leaving with her children, the man interrupted, nodding toward a woman who suddenly gathered her purchases with unnecessary haste, ushering 2 small children before her. The woman Amelia stepped aside, eyes downcast as the family passed. The mother pulled her children closer, as though the young woman carried something contagious. Colton watched the strange tableau, puzzled. The girl appeared perfectly respectable, if somewhat isolated, yet the other customers regarded her with expressions ranging from disgust to fear. One elderly woman actually crossed herself. When Amelia approached the counter, she stood at a distance from Colton, keeping her eyes focused on her list. Up close, he noticed a small scar near her temple, partially hidden by a loose strand of hair. Something about her deliberate movements, the way she made herself smaller, sparked an unexpected protectiveness in him. "That'll be 85 cents, the shopkeeper told her, placing her modest purchases on the counter without wrapping them. She reached into a small drawstring purse, counting out coins. When she came up short, a flush crept up her neck. "I'm sorry, I thought I had enough. Perhaps just the flour then." "Put it on my bill," Colton heard himself say before he'd even formed the thought.
The thread, too.
Both Amelia and the shopkeeper looked at him with surprise. Her violet eyes met his directly for the first time, wary and questioning. "That's not necessary," she said quietly. "Consider it a kindness between strangers," Colton replied, surprised by his own actions. He'd survived by minding his own business, yet something about the unfairness of her treatment had pricked at him. "Much obliged," she murmured, carefully gathering her purchases. The gratitude in her eyes was genuine, but tinged with confusion, as though kindness was a foreign language she barely recognized. As she turned to leave, a broad-shouldered man entering the store blocked her path, his face contorted in disgust. "Keep your distance, witch," he spat, making a warning gesture. Colton stiffened, hand instinctively moving toward the revolver on his hip, but Amelia merely stepped sideways without protest, the resignation on her face suggesting this was a regular occurrence. After she departed, Colton finished his transaction in thoughtful silence. When the shopkeeper pushed his parcels across the counter, he couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "The young lady, is she in some kind of trouble?" The man snorted. "Amelia Morley, she's trouble incarnate." "Best you stay clear, son." "What did she do?" Colton pressed. The shopkeeper leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "They say she's cursed. 3 men dead, 3, all connected to her. Her pa died when she was just a girl. Then her fiancé dropped dead the night before their wedding. Most recently, the rancher who took her in as housekeeper found face down in his creek last spring." "Accidents happen," Colton reasoned, finding the superstition ridiculous. 3 times and that ain't all. Crops fail when she walks past. Wells go dry." The man shook his head. "Some say she's in league with dark forces. Others think she's just plain cursed. Either way, decent folk keep their distance." Colton gathered his supplies with a curt nod, dismissing the gossip as frontier nonsense. He'd seen how isolation drove people to superstition, how communities needed scapegoats for their misfortunes. Still, as he loaded his saddlebags, he couldn't shake the image of those violet eyes, dignified in their hurt. He was leading Scout toward the livery stable when a commotion down an alleyway caught his attention. Raised voices, one distinctly female. Against his better judgment, he redirected his path. In the narrow space between buildings, 3 young men surrounded Amelia. Her back was against the wall, basket clutched protectively against her chest. Their postures made their intentions clear, not violence perhaps, but intimidation certainly. "Just wondering if you've cursed anyone new lately, Miss Morley," one taunted, knocking her basket from her hands. Flowers spilled across the dirt. "Please, I'm just trying to get home," she said, her voice steady despite her evident fear. "Home, that shack by the creek hardly counts. Town's been mighty generous letting you stay there at all, considering." "Maybe she's brewing potions out there," another suggested, reaching for her arm. "Perhaps we should." "That's enough," Colton interrupted, leading Scout into the alleyway. His voice was quiet but carried the unmistakable edge of a man who wouldn't need to repeat himself. The 3 turned, sizing him up. Colton knew what they saw, a trail-worn cowboy, lean but hard-muscled from years of ranch work, with calloused hands and eyes that had seen violence before and wouldn't flinch from seeing it again. "This doesn't concern you, stranger," the apparent leader said, though he took a step back. "I'm making it my concern." Colton's hand rested casually near his holster. 3 grown men harassing a lady doesn't speak well of the town's hospitality. "Lady," one of them laughed nervously. "You don't understand, she's—" "I understand perfectly well that you're bullying someone half your size." Colton's gaze hardened. "Now back away before I decide this town needs a lesson in manners." A tense moment passed before the 3 exchanged glances and retreated, muttering threats that diminished with each step. When they were gone, Colton turned his attention to Amelia, who was already kneeling to salvage what she could of the spilled flour. "Are you hurt, Miss Morley?" he asked, crouching beside her. "No," she answered, not meeting his eyes. "And it's just Amelia. Thank you for intervening, but you shouldn't have troubled yourself." "Stopping bullies is never trouble," he replied, helping gather the scattered items. "Do they bother you often?" A sad smile touched her lips. "Often enough. The town has superstitions about me." "So I gathered." He handed her the thread that had rolled near his boot. "Do you have far to go? I'd be happy to escort you home." Now she did look up, studying him with those remarkable violet eyes. "You're new to town, clearly. My reputation would suffer more damage from your kindness than you can possibly realize." "My reputation can withstand it," he said wryly. "Besides, I'm just passing through." Colton Travis, he offered his hand, surprised when she hesitated before taking it. "You shouldn't be seen with me," she warned, though she allowed him to help her to her feet. "I've never been one to care much what others think." It was true, isolation had its advantages. "Let me see you safely home, Miss Amelia." "Those boys might be waiting." After a moment's consideration, she nodded. It's not far, at the edge of town past the blacksmith's. They walked in silence, Scout plodding patiently behind them. Colton noted how Amelia kept careful distance between them, how her eyes remained downcast when they passed other townspeople. The whispers that followed them made his jaw tighten. Her home proved to be a small, weathered cabin set apart from the main settlement, near a bend in the creek. A modest vegetable garden grew alongside it, and chickens scratched in a small pen. Despite its humble appearance, the place was neat and well-maintained. "This is yours?" he asked as they approached. "It belonged to my father," she explained. "The only thing of his the town couldn't take away after he died. Even cursed daughters have some rights." There was a hint of bitterness in her otherwise controlled voice. At the door, she turned to him with a genuinely puzzled expression. "Why did you help me, Mr. Travis?" "Twice now, when most would cross the street to avoid me." Colton considered his answer carefully. "I don't believe in curses, Miss Amelia. I believe in people being cruel because they're afraid of what they don't understand." Something flickered in her eyes, relief, perhaps, or simple gratitude at being seen as human. "Thank you for the escort and for seeing me." She opened her door, then paused. "If you're staying in town, be warned, association with me does no favors for a man standing." "As I said, I'm just passing through," he reminded her, tipping his hat. "Heading back out tomorrow." She nodded, unsurprised, and slipped inside. As Colton turned Scout toward the livery, he told himself it was for the best. Getting involved in local disputes only complicated life, and complications were exactly what he'd spent years avoiding. Yet that night, as he bedded down in the livery loft, Colton found his thoughts returning to Amelia Morley, to her quiet dignity in the face of cruelty, and to the inexplicable urge he'd felt to protect her. It was foolishness, he knew. By this time tomorrow, he'd be miles away, and she would be just another sad story from another forgettable town. The morning brought an unexpected deluge, transforming the dusty streets into muddy rivers. Colton stood at the livery doors, watching sheets of rain turn the world gray. The stable master assured him the storm would pass by afternoon, but the delay chafed at him, or so he told himself. The truth that he found himself wondering how Amelia was faring alone in her cabin was more unsettling. "Might as well get some hot food while you wait," the stable master suggested.
"Martha's place serves a decent breakfast."
The small eatery was crowded with others waiting out the storm. Conversations flowed around him as he ate, most centered on the unusual weather and its implications for crops and cattle. Then a name caught his ear. "Morley Witch called this down," an older man declared from a nearby table. "Saw her at the creek yesterday, hands in the water, muttering to herself." "She was probably just washing clothes, Pa," his companion said wearily. "Then why's it raining fit to drown us all today? Tell me that." Colton focused on his coffee, but his knuckles whitened around the cup. The senselessness of it angered him more than it should have. After paying for his meal, he found himself walking not back to the livery, but through the downpour toward the edge of town. Amelia's cabin came into view, smoke rising determinedly from the chimney despite the rain. As he approached, he saw her struggling with the chicken coop, attempting to secure a section of roof that had partially collapsed under the weight of the water. She wore a man's old coat over her dress, both already soaked through. Without announcing himself, Colton strode through the mud to take the board from her hands. She startled, then recognized him. "Mr. Travis, what are you doing here?" "Looks like you could use an extra pair of hands," he said, already assessing the damage. "Chickens will drown at this rate." She didn't argue, instead fetching more nails as he braced the sagging roof. Together they worked quickly, securing the small structure against the onslaught. When they finished, she invited him inside with visible hesitation. "You should at least dry off before heading back," she offered, though her expression suggested she expected refusal. The cabin's interior surprised him. Though small, it was meticulously clean, with handmade curtains brightening the windows and shelves of carefully preserved food jars along one wall. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters. It felt more like a home than anywhere Colton had stayed in years. "Tea?" she asked, already pouring water from the kettle into a chipped but pretty cup. "It's willow bark and mint, good for keeping off the chill." He accepted with thanks, removing his dripping hat and coat at her insistence. As she moved about the small space, he noticed a shelf of worn books, unusual for a frontier cabin, and a small framed photograph of a stern-looking man beside a much younger Amelia. "My father," she explained, following his gaze. He was the town's doctor years ago. A doctor's daughter, Colton mused. That explains the herbs. Something in her posture changed, a wariness entering her movements. My father taught me about plants and their healing properties. A dangerous knowledge for a woman, it seems. Understanding dawned. That's why they call you a witch, because you know which plants heal. Amelia sat across from him, cradling her own cup. Partly, when my father died suddenly of fever, people wondered how the doctor's own daughter couldn't save him. Then my fiancé, her voice caught. Thomas had a weak heart, no one knew. When he collapsed at our rehearsal dinner, people whispered I'd poisoned him for his modest inheritance. And the third man, the rancher. Mr. Keller was kind to me when few others were, hired me to keep house after his wife died. He was old, unsteady on his feet. One day he went to fetch water. She shook her head. By the time I found him, it was too late. The town decided 3 deaths connected to one woman couldn't be coincidence. Rain drummed against the roof as Colton absorbed her story, and no one spoke for you, defended you. A few tried at first. But defending me meant inviting the same suspicion. Eventually, even friends decided I wasn't worth the trouble. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. I manage. I grow what I can, trade eggs and herbal remedies to the few who will still deal with me. Some come at night, when no one will see them seeking help for ailments they're too embarrassed to bring to the new doctor. That's no kind of life, Colton said, anger rising on her behalf. It's survival, she replied simply. We do what we must. The words echoed his own philosophy too closely for comfort. Wasn't that exactly what he'd been doing all these years? Surviving, but not living. The rain's letting up, Amelia observed, glancing toward the window. You should probably go before anyone notices you're here. Colton knew she was right. Already he'd involved himself more than prudence dictated. Yet leaving felt wrong somehow, like abandoning someone injured on the trail. I could stay, he found himself saying. Help repair whatever else needs fixing before I go. She studied him, confusion evident in her expression. Why would you do that? You don't know me. I know enough, he replied. I know you don't deserve how they treat you. For the first time, he saw genuine emotion break through her carefully maintained composure, a fleeting vulnerability quickly masked. There's a loose board on the back porch that's been catching at my skirts, she conceded, if you're truly willing. One repair led to another. The loose board revealed rotted supports beneath. The leaking roof needed patching in 3 places. By the time the sun began its descent, Colton had accomplished more manual labor than he'd planned, but the satisfaction of seeing Amelia's cautious smile as she tested the solid porch steps was unexpectedly rewarding. You missed your window of good weather for traveling, she noted as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the rain-washed sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I've kept you too long. I don't mind, he said truthfully. First time in a while I've felt useful for something beyond moving cattle. What will you do? Where will you go next? She asked, genuine interest in her voice. Colton shrugged. Wherever the work is, been that way since I was 19. Ranch to ranch, season to season. No home to return to. Not anymore, he didn't elaborate, and she didn't press, understanding etched in the gentle nod she gave him. Well, you have certainly earned a proper meal, Amelia declared, rising. It's not much, but I have a rabbit stew that's been simmering all day, and I baked bread yesterday. The simple meal they shared that evening was the best Colton had eaten in months, not for its ingredients, but for the quiet companionship that accompanied it. Amelia proved to be well-read and thoughtful, with a subtle wit that emerged as she grew more comfortable in his presence. For his part, Colton found himself sharing stories of his travels he'd never bothered telling anyone before: the majesty of Montana's mountains, the vast loneliness of the Dakota plains, the strange beauty of desert nights. It sounds wonderful, she said wistfully, to see so many different places. Mostly it's the same, he admitted, different landscapes but the same loneliness. The words hung between them, more honest than he'd intended. In the flickering firelight, Amelia's eyes held no pity, only recognition. Tomorrow, he said as he prepared to leave, I'll fix that gate before I head out. But tomorrow brought more repairs, and the next day more still. Each evening, Colton told himself it would be his last in Whispering Pines. Each morning he found another reason to delay, a loose shingle, a garden needing tending, a fence requiring mending. The truth, which he was reluctantly beginning to acknowledge, was that he enjoyed Amelia's company in a way he'd enjoyed nothing for years. On the fourth day, as they worked side by side in her garden, a commotion at the front of the property drew their attention. 3 men on horseback approached, led by the town's sheriff, a graying man with a permanent scowl. "That's far enough, Travis," the sheriff called. "Step away from the woman." Colton straightened, instinctively moving to stand between Amelia and the men. "Something I can help you with, Sheriff." "Been hearing things about you," the lawman said. Cozying up to this, he gestured at Amelia with distaste, when decent folks know to keep their distance. "Makes a man wonder what you're really doing in our town." "Passing through," Colton replied evenly, "just helping a neighbor with some repairs." "Neighbor," one of the other riders spat. "She's no neighbor of ours. And you do well to remember you're not welcome here either if you continue this association." Amelia stepped forward, her voice calm despite the tension. "Mr. Travis has been kind enough to help with some work I couldn't manage alone. He's done nothing wrong." "Didn't ask you, Miss Morley," the sheriff snapped. "Travis, I'll be plain. There's talk you might be involved in that stage robbery over in Green River last month. Description matches, young cowboy, riding a dun horse." Colton's blood ran cold. "That's ridiculous. I was working the Double J ranch down near Laramie until 2 weeks ago. Jim Jensen himself can vouch for me." "Convenient that's a 3-day ride from here," the sheriff observed. "Look, I'm not arresting you, yet. But I am suggesting you move on, today, if you don't want trouble, and find different company in the next town." The message was clear. Colton's jaw tightened as he fought down his anger. "I'll leave when I'm ready." "See that it's soon," the sheriff warned before the 3 men wheeled their horses around and rode away. When they were out of earshot, Amelia turned to him, distress evident in her face. "You have to go, now." "They're looking for excuses." "I'm not running because of baseless accusations," Colton insisted. "They'll find a reason to arrest you or worse," she countered. "I've seen how this town works. Please, Colton. Don't let what happened to me happen to you." Her use of his first name and the genuine fear in her eyes gave him pause. "I can't just leave you here at their mercy." "I've survived this long," she reminded him. "And your staying only makes things worse for both of us." She was right, and he knew it. The sensible choice was to ride out, continue his solitary journey as he'd always intended. Yet the thought of Amelia facing the town's cruelty alone twisted something in his chest. "I'll go," he conceded finally, "but I'll be back once I've sorted this out." "I give you my word." The relief in her eyes was tempered with something else, a resignation that suggested she didn't quite believe his promise. "Thank you for the kindness you've shown me," she said formally, as if already distancing herself. "It's meant more than you know." An hour later, Colton rode out of Whispering Pines, the sheriff's watchful gaze following him until he crested the hill. But instead of continuing east as expected, he circled back through the foothills, making camp in a secluded spot that overlooked the town from a distance. The accusation of robbery was clearly a pretext, but he couldn't shake the unease it stirred. Something about the situation felt orchestrated. For 3 days, Colton remained in his hidden camp, venturing close enough to town after dark to observe without being seen. Each evening, he watched the lamp in Amelia's cabin window burn late into the night. Each morning, he saw her emerge to tend her garden and animals, always looking toward the eastern trail as if watching for someone. On the 4th day, his vigilance was rewarded. Shortly after noon, he observed 3 riders approaching Amelia's cabin, the same men who had harassed her in the alley, including the sheriff's son. Even from a distance, their predatory posture was unmistakable. When they dismounted and began pounding on her door, Colton was already in motion, guiding Scout down the hillside at a controlled pace that wouldn't attract attention. He approached from behind the cabin, tethering Scout in the trees before creeping closer. Through a rear window, he could see Amelia standing her ground in the center of her small home, arms crossed defensively as the men ransacked her shelves. "We know you're hiding something," one was saying. "All these herbs and potions, it ain't natural." "Those are simple remedies," Amelia replied, her voice steady despite her evident fear. "Teas for colds, tinctures for pain. Nothing more." "What about this?" The sheriff's son held up a small leather-bound book. "Looks like a spell book to me." That was my father's medical journal, she protested as he flipped through it carelessly. Please, it's all I have of him. The young man tossed it into the fire. Amelia's anguished cry spurred Colton into action. He burst through the door, revolver drawn. Step away from her, he commanded, his voice deadly quiet. The three men froze, then slowly raised their hands. Travis, the sheriff's son, sneered, recovering his composure.
Thought you'd skipped town.
Changed my mind, Colton replied. Now, you boys are going to walk out of here and leave Miss Morley in peace.
Or what, you'll shoot the sheriff's son, he smirked.
That'll go well for you. I'll shoot anyone who threatens an innocent woman, Colton stated flatly. Badge or no badge, family connections or not. A tense standoff followed, broken when Amelia moved to Colton's side.
Please just go, she urged the intruders. Take whatever you think is dangerous, just leave us be.
Us, the sheriff's son's eyes narrowed as he looked between them. So that's how it is.
Wait till the town hears about this, the witch and the drifter.
Out, Colton ordered, gesturing with his gun. Now. Reluctantly, the three backed toward the door. This isn't over, the leader warned. Not by a long shot. When they were gone, Colton secured the door before turning to Amelia, who had sunk to her knees before the fireplace, desperately trying to save fragments of the burning journal. I'm sorry, he said, holstering his weapon and crouching beside her. About the book. It's gone, she whispered, tears streaking her face as she cradled a charred corner that was all that remained. His handwriting, his thoughts, all gone. Without thinking, Colton pulled her into his arms. She stiffened momentarily before collapsing against him, years of stoically borne grief finally breaking free. He held her as she wept, murmuring reassurances, one hand gently stroking her hair. When her tears subsided, she pulled back slightly, embarrassed. I'm sorry, I don't normally. Don't apologize, he interrupted gently, not for feeling. Her eyes met his, something shifting in their violet depths. Then with a boldness that surprised them both, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief, tentative, but it sent a jolt through Colton unlike anything he'd experienced before. When Amelia pulled away, uncertainty written across her features, he found himself drawing her back, kissing her with the pent-up longing of a man who had denied himself connection for too long. I shouldn't have, she began when they finally parted. I'm glad you did, he said simply. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek, wiping away the remnants of tears. Very glad. A smile, genuine and unguarded, transformed her face. For a moment they remained that way, the outside world forgotten. Then reality reasserted itself. They'll be back, Amelia said, practicality returning. With the sheriff, you should go, Colton. They'll arrest you now for sure. I'm not leaving you, he said firmly. Not again. Then we'll both suffer for it. The town won't stand for whatever this is between us. She gestured helplessly. They already think I'm dangerous. Now they'll believe I've ensnared you somehow. Colton considered their options, mind racing. Then we'll both go, tonight, pack what you can carry. Scout can handle both of us until we reach the next town.
Amelia stared at him, disbelief evident. You can't be serious. Your life, your freedom.
Means nothing if I ride away and leave you to their mercy. He took her hands in his. I've spent years convincing myself that being alone was safer. That caring for anyone or anything would only lead to loss. But these past days with you, he shook his head, struggling to articulate the transformation within him. I've been surviving, Amelia, not living. And I think perhaps you have too. Where would we go, she asked, a flicker of hope lighting her eyes. West, Colorado maybe, or further to California, somewhere we can start fresh where no one knows either of us.
She hesitated only briefly before nodding. Yes. Yes, I'll go with you.
They worked quickly, gathering only essentials, food, clothing, the few valuables Amelia possessed. Colton retrieved his gear from his hidden camp while she prepared for the journey. By dusk, they were ready. One last thing, Amelia said as they prepared to leave. From a loose floorboard beneath her bed, she extracted a small wooden box. Inside lay a gold pocket watch and a modest sum of money, my father's. I've saved it all these years, thinking someday I might need it to escape. I never had the courage to go alone. Colton covered her hand with his. You're not alone anymore. They slipped away as night fell. avoiding the main road in favor of a lesser-known trail that wound through the foothills. Amelia rode behind Colton, arms wrapped around his waist, her warmth against his back a novel and welcome sensation. They made good time under the cover of darkness, putting several miles between themselves and whispering pines before making camp in a sheltered grove. As they sat by their small fire, sharing the last of Amelia's bread, Colton found himself studying her profile in the flickering light. She seemed younger somehow, unburdened by the weight of the town's judgment. "Second thoughts?" he asked when he caught her staring into the flames. "No," she answered without hesitation, just wondering if it can really be this simple, leaving everything behind. "Nothing simple about it," he admitted. "We've got hard traveling ahead, no guarantees waiting at the end, but at least we'll face it on our own terms." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Together. The word hung between them, full of promise and uncertainty. Colton reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. The connection felt right in a way few things in his life ever had. Their rest was brief but peaceful. At first light, they continued westward, keeping to less traveled paths. Amelia proved to be a hardier traveler than Colton had anticipated, facing the rigors of the trail without complaint. By nightfall of the second day, they reached a small trading post where Colton was able to purchase a gentle mare for Amelia to ride. "She's nothing fancy," he apologized as Amelia stroked the dappled gray's nose, "but she'll get you where you're going without fuss." "She's perfect," Amelia declared, already forming a bond with the animal. "I'll call her Hope." The name seemed fitting for more than just the horse. As they continued their journey over the following days, Colton felt something unfamiliar taking root within him, a sense of purpose, of possibility. Each night their conversations grew longer, their connection deeper. Each morning, waking to Amelia's smile drove back the shadows of his solitary past. On the sixth day, they crested a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the valley beyond. Lush grasslands stretched toward distant mountains, a river winding silver through the midst of it all. "It's beautiful," Amelia breathed, raining hope alongside Scout. "That's North Park," Colton informed her. "Part of Colorado Territory now. Good cattle country from what I've heard, still plenty of unclaimed land." A thoughtful expression crossed her face. Unclaimed land, a fresh start. "That's the idea," he agreed, though something in her tone made him curious. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that running is necessary, but it's not a life." She turned to face him fully. "Sooner or later, we need to stop running and start building." The words resonated deeply. Hadn't he been running for years, telling himself it was the only way to survive? "Are you proposing we settle here, Amelia Morley?" he asked, only half joking. "I'm proposing we consider it," she replied seriously. "You know cattle, I know herbs and gardening. Between us, we have the beginnings of what could be a decent ranch." A blush colored her cheeks. "If that's something you might want." Colton studied the valley below, seeing it with new eyes, not just as a temporary stopping point, but as a potential home. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, he found it strangely appealing. "It would be hard work," he cautioned, "starting from nothing." "I'm not afraid of hard work," she reminded him, "only of living half a life because I'm too afraid to reach for more." The honesty of her statement struck him. How long had he been doing exactly that, existing rather than living, moving on whenever connections threatened to form? "Let's at least explore it," he suggested, "see what the valley has to offer before we decide." They made their way down into North Park, discovering a landscape even more promising up close than it had appeared from a distance. Game was plentiful, the grass rich, the river clean and swift. 2 days of exploration led them to a perfect spot, a natural clearing backed by forest, with the river curving around it like a protective arm. "This would be an ideal place for a cabin," Colton observed, dismounting to examine the ground. "Good drainage, sheltered from the worst winds, plenty of timber nearby." Amelia wandered the clearing, stooping occasionally to examine plants. "The soil is rich here. Look, wild onions, yarrow, even some columbine. A garden would thrive." Something stirred in Colton's chest as he watched her, a vision of a future he'd never allowed himself to imagine. A cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, fields of grass where cattle grazed, and Amelia moving through it all like the heart that gave it life. "We could do it," he said, the decision crystallizing as he spoke. "Stake a claim, build something that's ours." She turned to him, hope and caution warring in her expression. Do you mean that, truly? You've lived your whole adult life moving from place to place. Could you really be content staying in one spot? Colton crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. The only time I've felt truly content in years has been these past weeks with you. I kept moving because I had nowhere that felt worth staying, no one worth staying for. The vulnerability in his admission hung in the air between them. Amelia squeezed his hands gently. And now, she asked softly, now I think I've found both. He drew her closer. If you'll have me, if you're willing to build this life together. Her answer was in the way she rose on tiptoe to kiss him, in the tears that sparkled on her lashes, in the smile that bloomed across her face like the wildflowers at their feet. Yes, she whispered against his lips, yes to all of it. The weeks that followed tested their resolve and strengthened their bond. They traveled to the nearest settlement to file a claim on the land, drawing curious glances but no hostility from the scattered residents of the area. With their combined resources, they purchased basic supplies, seeds for planting, and a small herd of 10 cattle to start their operation. Building the cabin proved to be the greatest challenge. Colton had helped raise buildings before but never constructed one from scratch. Amelia learned quickly, her slender hands growing calloused as she worked alongside him. They labored from dawn until dusk, falling into exhausted sleep each night in a temporary shelter of canvas and branches. But with each log placed, each roof beam secured, their vision took tangible form. By the time the first snow threatened, they had a sturdy one-room cabin with a stone fireplace, a small stable for the horses, and even the beginnings of a garden plot turned and mulched for spring planting. On the evening they moved into the completed cabin, Amelia prepared a special meal from their dwindling stores. As they sat before the fire, contentment settled over them like a warm blanket. It's not much yet, Colton observed, looking around the humble space, but it's ours. It's everything, Amelia corrected, leaning against his shoulder, more than I ever dared hope for. They had spoken often of the future during their weeks of work, of expanding the herd, of adding rooms to the cabin as needed, of the life they would build together. But one subject had remained delicately unaddressed until now. Amelia, Colton began, suddenly nervous in a way that facing down armed men had never made him. There's something I've been meaning to ask you. She turned to him, firelight dancing across her features. Yes. From his pocket he withdrew a simple band of silver, purchased in secret during their supply run, trading his father's pocket knife to afford it. I know we've only known each other a short time, he said, the words coming with unexpected difficulty. But I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to find you, to find this. He gestured to encompass not just the cabin, but the life they were creating. I don't want to just build a ranch with you. I want to build a family. A future, everything. Amelia's eyes widened as she understood what he was asking. Colton. Will you marry me, Amelia? He asked simply. Be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children someday. Let me love you for the rest of our lives. Tears spilled over as she nodded, too overcome for words at first. Yes, she finally managed, with all my heart, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, a healing of old wounds neither had believed would ever fully mend. That winter tested them in different ways. Isolated by snow and distance from the nearest neighbors, they learned each other's rhythms, strengths, and weaknesses. They shared stories of their pasts, Colton's loss of his family, Amelia's struggles against superstition and fear. In the telling and listening, old hurts began to heal. When spring finally arrived, bringing with it new grass and calves for their small herd, they traveled to the growing settlement of Walden to be married by a circuit-riding preacher. The ceremony was simple, witnessed only by the proprietor of the general store and his wife, but the joy that infused it was profound. Mrs. Travis, Colton murmured as they rode back toward their homestead, the name still new on his tongue. Amelia smiled, adjusting the simple white bonnet she'd worn for the occasion. It sounds right, doesn't it, like it was always meant to be. That night, as husband and wife, they committed themselves to each other fully, their union a culmination of the love that had grown between them against all odds. In Amelia's arms, Colton found the home he'd stopped believing existed. In his embrace, she found acceptance she'd thought forever denied her. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Their herd grew, as did their homestead. A second room was added to the cabin, then a third. Their reputation in the valley solidified as Colton's knowledge of cattle proved valuable to neighbors, while Amelia's skill with herbs made her a sought-after healer for both humans and livestock. In their third year, when Amelia laid a hand over her swelling belly and whispered, "It's time to build that cradle you've been designing," Colton felt a completeness he'd never imagined possible. The birth of their daughter, Catherine, in the depths of winter transformed their lives once more. As Colton held the tiny bundle, her eyes already showing hints of her mother's remarkable violet, he marveled at how far they had traveled, not just in miles, but in spirit. "She's perfect," he whispered, passing the infant back to Amelia's waiting arms, just like her mother. Amelia smiled tiredly. "She has your chin and your stubbornness, I suspect." "Heaven help us all," Colton laughed, sitting beside them on the bed he'd crafted with his own hands. "I love you both more than I have words to express." "Then show us," Amelia replied softly, "every day for the rest of our lives." And he did, through the arrival of a son 2 years later, through droughts and blizzards, through the gradual expansion of their ranch into one of the most prosperous in the valley. Colton showed his family the depth of his love. The solitary man who had once believed connection meant only pain learned that it was, in fact, the foundation of his strength. For Amelia, the transformation was equally profound. The woman once shunned as cursed became respected throughout the region for her wisdom and kindness. When 10 years after their arrival, a family from Whispering Pines moved into the valley and recognized her, the old fears had no power to take root in the rich soil of the life she and Colton had built together. On their 20th anniversary, standing on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children tend to chores with the confidence of young people raised in love and security, Amelia leaned into her husband's embrace. "Do you ever think about how close we came to missing this?" she asked, "if you hadn't stopped in Whispering Pines that day?" "I try not to," Colton admitted, his arm tightening around her waist. "But I'm grateful every day that I did." Who would have thought the town's most shunned woman and the loneliest cowboy would find this together? She gestured to the prosperous ranch spread before them, cattle grazing in verdant pastures, outbuildings standing sturdy against the elements, the garden bursting with vegetables and flowers alike. "I think perhaps we were always heading toward each other," Colton reflected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "All those years of solitude were just the path leading me to you." Amelia turned in his arms, her face as beautiful to him now as it had been that first day in the general store. "A path from solitude to love," she murmured, "for both of us." As the sun set over their land, painting the mountains in gold and crimson, Colton Travis held his wife close, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. From a man who believed love was a liability to husband and father whose heart expanded with each passing year. From a woman isolated by fear to one surrounded by family and community who valued her for exactly who she was. They had traveled far, these two souls who found each other when they needed it most. And in the end, the greatest distance covered was not measured in miles, but in the space between two hearts that had once believed themselves destined for solitude, now forever joined in love.